When we think of societies with social classes, ancient Greece tends to be forgotten. We acknowledge the part that they play in philosophy and in math, and even what democracy looks like today, but we seem to forget their rigid hierarchy. Yes, they invented democracy, but who's actually allowed to participate? Spoiler alert, it's not most people. Classical Athens from about 500 to 300 BCE has been recorded more than any other ancient society. And once you look past the Socrates and Aristotle and even the marble columns, what you find is one of history's most carefully organized class systems. It just happens to be hidden behind all of those statues and speeches about freedom. So let me break down to you how this worked. Picture a pyramid. At the top of the pyramid, less than 10% of the population are male citizens. Now, to be clear, only adult, free-born Athenian men whose both parents were citizens. These men could vote, own office, hold land, and speak in the assembly. Everyone else was excluded. Right below them are the metics. These were foreigners who were free, who lived in Athens to work or trade. They paid extra taxes, couldn't own land, and could not marry a citizen. Legally free, but definitely second class. Then you have free slaves. Some earned their freedom, some bought it. They occupied a middle zone, free but without citizenship rights, and often still tied to their former masters. At the very bottom below them is the largest group, slaves. Roughly about 30 to 40% of Athens' population. They had no rights at all. They could be bought, sold, tortured, killed by their owners. And finally, we have women. Their category is a little bit harder to explain just because technically they could really appear anywhere on this list, depending on things like what family she was born into and who she was married to. However, even citizen women could not vote, own land, or speak in court. Their main goal was to produce male heirs. And that's your basic ancient Greek hierarchy. So how did Athens come up with this rigid hierarchy? Well, there are three factors. First is the early Athenian law and birth. Before democracy, Athens had a lawgiver named Draco. His laws made sharp distinctions between aristocrats and commoners. Statuses were determined by birth, and the eupatridae, literally meaning the well-fathered ones, were the noble families who controlled everything. Everyone else had fewer rights. This birth-based division was the original seed of the hierarchy. Second is the economic crisis and debt slavery. Between 700 and 600 BCE, Athens became a farming society where small farmers regularly fell into debt. If you could not pay that, you became a hectomoros, a sixth part farmer, who had to give 1/6 of your harvest to a wealthy landlord. Fail that, you or your family could be sold into slavery. By 600 BCE, so many Athenians had been enslaved and by their own neighbors that the city was close to civil war. It was not conquest. This was an economic collapse, turning citizens into slaves. Third and last were the reforms of Solon. In 594 BCE, Athens appointed Solon as the archon with special powers to fix the crisis. He did two massive things. First, he canceled all existing debt slaveries and freed everyone who had been enslaved. Second, he banned using a person's body as collateral for loans going forward. No Athens citizen could ever be enslaved for debt again. But Solon did not give everyone equality. He divided citizens into four wealth classes. So the richest could hold the highest offices, the poorest could only vote in the assembly. So he ended one kind of hierarchy, debt slavery, and replaced it with another, a formal, legal, wealth-based class system. What really made this system stick was thinkers like Aristotle, who was not Athenian by birth, but taught there. He argued that slavery was natural. He wrote that some people were born to rule and some people were born to be ruled. That gave the hierarchy a moral justification, not really just power, but nature itself. Given that we are many, many years past the times of ancient Greece, I can't really survey how people felt about the class system, but we can look at two things: the well-documented impacts on people's lives and what modern scholars debate today. Now, based on these documents, the impacts were severe. In Sparta, the state annually declared war on the Helots so citizens could kill them without consequences. They called this the Crypteia. In Athens, citizens, women, could not choose their own husbands or control their own property. and slaves, even skilled bankers or artisans, could be beaten or killed with no legal protection. Modern historians actively debate three questions. First, was this a class system or a caste system? Most people say class because some nobility existed. Slaves could buy freedom, medics could become citizens, though it was rare. Unlike India's birth law caste, the Greek system had its cracks. Second, how much mobility actually happened? Recent research suggests skilled slaves and successful medics had more opportunities than earlier scholars had believed. One famous example of this is a famous slave named Patience. He started as a bank clerk, worked and bought his freedom, became wealthy, and eventually gained Athenian citizenship. That was great for him, but it also helps in proving the system was not completely sealed. The third question was the system stable? Athens experienced multiple neo-revolutions, and people were not quietly accepting their place, so their hierarchy was always contested. Now the good news is, things did change. Solon's reforms ended debt slavery for citizens, so no Athenian citizen could be enslaved for debt anymore. That was enormous. Cleisthenes then broke the aristocrat script on power and created real democracy for male citizens. A poor farmer could now speak at the assembly next to a wealthy noble. During the Hellenistic period, after Alexander the Great's conquests, the lines between Greek and non-Greek blurred. Medics and even some former slaves gained citizenship more easily. The rigid citizen versus foreigner wall started cracking. Now, on the other hand, the more bad news is, two groups saw almost no change. It was slaves and women. Slavery continued throughout Greek history, and women remained legally subordinate. The deep belief that some people are born to rule and others to serve proved incredibly durable. In the end, it was really the military crisis that helped push these changes through. Poor citizens became essential as rowers in the Navy, and that gave them real bargaining power because you cannot really easily replace an entire fleet of rowers. Economic growth also played a role in this too. Trade created wealthy outsiders who had money but no rights, and eventually they demanded in. And underneath that all, the constant threat of revolt from below. People fighting back, not asking politely, pushed the system open. So it was really changes in the people's behavior and simple supply and demand that clearly wreak havoc on the original structures. Now, since I'm from the future and I can see some of the influences from ancient Athens, here's my takeaway. It had a clear legally enforced hierarchy built on conquest, economic pressure, and political compromise. It was more open than a caste system. You can climb it if you're lucky or skilled, but far more rigid than any true modern democracy. Athens gave us philosophy and art and theater and so much more, but it built that on the backs of slaves and excluded women. The system changed over time, but it never fully solved its core problem, the idea that your birth decides your worth. I believe that this is the warning Athens leaves for us. A society can call itself free while leaving most of its people behind. And if we forget to look past the marble columns, we might not even notice.